I think my politics shifted first, and in many ways because of becoming a mother. Pregnancy made me suddenly aware of bodily autonomy and feminism, an anxious child to the danger of fear-based beliefs and abuse. All of these started unraveling particular beliefs and ultimately resulted in losing them altogether.
Even at my most devoted as a Christian, what I always struggled with was my worldview. How could it be that Christianity was the way, the truth, the life? And so many people believe so many different things. And yet they're still good people, they're doing good in the world, and they're leading fulfilled lives. How could it be that my way was the only way? It just didn't make sense to me.
There were lots of spiritual teachings and practices that just did not make sense to me and didn't work for me. And so I actually read Emerson, and that really helped me to understand that there wasn't anything wrong with me for wanting to find my own spirituality.
Welcome to Forsaking Faith, where we tackle these and other thoughts through discussion and contemplation.
This is Heather Bailey and Christine Goodrich. Our podcast explores the journey from fundamentalist Christianity to non-belief by examining the deep and nuanced effects of deconversion.
While some ex-Christians focus on the negative aspects of their past, we want to emphasize how leaving Christianity is a complicated process that brings both pain and joy. It is both loss and liberation. While we lose structure, community, and stability, we gain empowerment and agency.
We want to create a space for thoughtful discussion in this spirit, and we invite you all to join us.
There were a lot of things about Christianity that I didn't buy into, and I was just sort of trusting the knowledge of my elders and my mentors when I was a Christian. I memorized Bible scripture and I read the Bible, but I didn't study the Bible. Even when I did study the Bible, I was more interested in the timeline of the Bible and how it developed into what it was. I really was interested in the Nicene Council and how the Bible sort of came together. But I didn't study scripture as though it was a textbook. And so a lot of, like I said, a lot of what I believed came from my mentors and my elders. And which didn't really jive with me. Like, there were a lot of things in terms of like the fact that there were starving children in the world always really bugged me. I didn't understand why God caused the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. I was like, okay, like I get that it says that. So yeah, I was sort of like, I never understood the idea of the all-powerful God not having more say over what happened. And I kind of understood that, like, okay, well, maybe the people who die needlessly just go to heaven, and so it's fine. Look at the Old Testament. God seems very judgmental and strong-armed. And in the New Testament, the way Jesus depicts God is like a loving father. And so it's very strange to even think that those are talking about the same God. And so for me, I was just really confused. So I was really frustrated in the way that we tried to accept Christians who weren't in line with our biblical beliefs, or what we said were our biblical beliefs. Actually, what would Jesus do was a big deal for me when I was a young girl.
You used to have bracelets and...
We did. We had bracelets, and everything said, "What would Jesus do?" Right? So it was strange because there were a whole bunch of contradicting views. Like, okay, Jesus would hang out with prostitutes, but yet we condemned that idea, and we didn't even we sort of saw them as disgusting. Because I didn't buy into a lot of that, I think it made it easier for me when I deconverted. I think I first had a worldview loss. When I deconverted, I was like, okay, I don't know what to believe about the world. I don't know, I didn't have like a strong sense of order or fairness when I was a Christian anyway. So I didn't really expect a new sense of order or fairness. And so when I was a Christian, so right before I deconverted, I was thinking like, okay, I got to get a husband, kids, and a job. And it was very 1950s, let's say, but it wasn't, but with the job attached to the end, I did think that was good. But then after I deconverted, I didn't need those things anymore. I have those things and I'm happy about those things, but it wasn't sort of my progression. I didn't have long-term goals when I was a Christian, and that changed when I deconverted. Not that I have long-term goals now. I just have longer term goals, right? So I plan for like 2-3 years in the future, if that, because I sort of have seen my life go in a lot of different directions, and I like living in the moment. And so for me, I don't need that long-term security or stability in my goals. I mean, when it comes to like planning for retirement and things, I do put away, but I didn't, that wasn't something that came from my Christianity either. So I also realized that it was important for me to make an impact on people after I deconverted. Whereas before, I knew that I had to be kind, but there's a difference for me from when I was a Christian between being kind and being impactful. And now, like when I was getting my PhD, it was on plant, like I was studying plants, and it wasn't profound enough for me. It wasn't impactful enough for me to continue. Whereas if I was a Christian, it would just be like me following God's plan, or me kind of going with the motions because that's where I went. But now that I have some agency in that, I'm like, no, I really want to work with people, and I want to see the change that I make, hopefully making in people's lives.
Can you describe in more detail, like when you talk about being impactful, like what do you envision in like an interaction with someone that would be impactful?
It doesn't take much to be impactful in someone's life. But it's not the same as being kind. Being impactful to me means investing in someone's purpose. Investing my time in someone's purpose. When I was studying plants, it felt really empty because I was like, well, what is my end goal here? I'm going to end up knowing a lot about plants and helping lake managers, people who own property on the lake, clear their lake for recreation. And that to me is not impactful. And I can't see it directly with people. And so I really want to, I would like to be in an environment where what I do has not necessarily immediate consequences, but has I can see a direct line from what I have done in someone's life to a goal that they've met or something. I think that helping people meet their goals is what I essentially view as impactful for me. I always have trouble when people say to their kids that they can do anything they want, right? So I had this worldview when I was young. I actually did think I was rather special. And I have friends who will back me up on this. I was like original or unique, that sort of, that emo sense of like, nobody understands me,
Well, to be fair, you do have a very high I mean, I think out of everyone in our friend group, you have one of the highest IQs.
Oh, maybe. I don't know. I don't know anymore. I think I've dropped some points. No. I don't know. Anyway, so my worldview has changed a lot in terms of that too, because I don't think everyone has the same sense of purpose or even the same ability. I think that we're limited by our physical and mental and even emotional prowess, right? And I think that when people say you can do anything you want, it kind of breaks limitations. And I do think that there are people who can break limitations, right? I actually think that there are people who can work really hard to get to first place. But I also think that there are people who can work really hard to get to second place and cannot reach first place, no matter how hard they work. And I think that there is something beautiful in believing that, right? Like God loves me and I am special is this different way of looking. I mean, that's how I looked at it when I was young, right? That if God has a plan for me, then it will just eventually unfold, right? But now I think more in terms of my personal potential right now. How far can I go with the tools that I have right now? And what tools do I have to gain in order to get there? And how do I practically set my limitations, And that's something that I didn't know how to do when I was a Christian, because I didn't understand this goal processing. And don't get me wrong, there were plenty of Christians in my school who knew how to do that and were set up correctly to understand that. And I think that had a lot to do with, class and how much investment their parents put in their lives, both monetarily and emotionally. And I don't think I had that in my parents. My mom loved me, of course, and my dad loved me, but it was just a different kind of physical and mental investment in my life. They sort of let me do my own thing, which is good in some ways and bad in others. Speaking of parenting, a lot of the way I parent has changed too, because when I deconverted, my value system disappeared, right? So that husband jobs kid thing, or the husband kids job thing, went to maybe not a husband, possibly kids, and definitely a job, right? So it was sort of had this shift. And when I stopped thinking about having kids, I stopped preparing for having kids. And so I didn't create an individual value system for my child. I started thinking a lot about what have I missed? What did I miss doing when I was a Christian, and how can I invest my life now that it makes my life more meaningful? But I didn't think how will I make my child's life meaningful? Was sort of this, again, it was not thinking ahead, something that I gained from just trusting God, right? This not thinking ahead idea. And now that I have a daughter, it's a lot of oh, wait a second, what do I believe about this specific thing? What school do I want her to go to, and why? And do I still want her to go to a private school? Because I went to a private school, or would I like her to go to a public school? And I did go to public school for a little while, so I have a relatively unbiased standpoint about that. But so, I'm kind of starting with a blank slate here, because I don't have that guidebook that is the Bible to tell me what to teach her. And of course, you can pull good things from Christianity and from the Bible, and I do, but I also have to be careful with that as well, because things that I used to think were good aren't necessarily values that I hold anymore. They're not things that I think of as being positive. And so it's been difficult to sort of change from knowing exactly that I wanted kids and how to parent them and who to parent them with to, okay, I think I'm going to have a kid, and then she'll grow up. Hopefully in between I do something right, and I do, I do make plans, and we have goals together with her. I am getting somewhere. It definitely is a more dynamic process than it might have been if I was a Christian, and I think raising children is still a dynamic process no matter what, but there are some consistencies that happen even when my parents were raising me that were easy, and on Sunday you went to church and you got involved with church in as much as possible. We read the Bible, we prayed. There is a process for raising children that is set for you when you're a Christian, and that process isn't there anymore. Now that I am not a Christian, life is so much more of a gift than it was when I was a Christian. Even if the human species dies out, I still feel like this moment in time that I've been given is it's here, it's now, and it's very alive to me, this gift that I've been given by no one. I think that this awareness of self, this piece of consciousness, is something that we can all enjoy or at least find purpose in. I'm not saying that everybody can enjoy their life. I think that there are some people who don't have the mental chemistry to necessarily enjoy their life. And thankfully, we're moving in a direction where we can help them work with that mental chemistry. And I think that also some people just don't live in the kind of situation where they're allowed to enjoy their life, and it's just about survival. And when I was a Christian, I thought everybody's purpose in life was to find God and have a relationship with him. And in terms of a greater purpose, it was just, eventually we'll worship God in heaven. It wasn't like a real solid life purpose. It was like more of a eventually purpose, and something that was really abstract like heaven. So it was really strange. I really think, and a lot of people sort of lose their purpose after they lose Christianity. I think for me, I gained my purpose because I was like, oh, life doesn't have any meaning. That means I put it in there. That means that I get to say what my goals are, and you know what, when they're done, and that's okay. And I really have embraced this idea, I think, because I did see, I was like, if God can create so many people who worship him, right, then why me? There is nothing special about me. At least from my perspective, right? And I thought this way more when I was a Christian, way more, because I saw so many other people who could glorify God better than I could, and now I feel better because I'm not less of a person than those people who could glorify God better than me. I don't know. I think that in terms of my worldview has changed, my political views have changed, but I think the biggest thing for me is thinking of life as a gift. Like the fact that I live moment to moment is amazing. And that I'm not waiting for this judgment day anymore. And I can choose my direction independently of this deity who will judge me eventually. That's really freeing and exciting. And I do have some problems, with the world the way it is, but I don't think for me, Christianity solves any of those problems. And I think even when I was a Christian, I was really confused about those issues. So now I'm still confused, but at least I have some agency in my life, and I'm pretty excited about that.
Yeah, so I too am getting to a place where I feel like I have more agency in my life, but I think I'm not quite where you are at yet, Christine, but that's where I want to be. And I'm getting there, but I am still going through the phase of feeling a lot of anxieties at losing purpose. So when as a Christian, unlike Christine, I completely bought in to the Christian worldview. So I believed that God was in control of everything, and anything that happened was, because God ordained it to happen. And so anything that, Christine had talked about discrepancies and, people, there were people who were living day to day and not able to eat. And she was saying that she saw the problems with that, based on a worldview. I mean, from my perspective and the way that I was raised, that none of that mattered, because I had a very strong sense that nothing in this world matters, because there's this end goal and end purpose, which is the afterlife. And so even if something bad is happening to someone, or even though there are people in the world who are living in abject poverty, as long as they're, as long as they are become Christians, then they will be able to live in the afterlife and spend the rest of their, eternity in heaven. And so it made me very passive, unless it came to proselytizing. And then I was very active, right? Because, I really bought into the idea that we should all be trying to convert other people to Christianity because the only thing that matters is heaven. But in terms of other things, it made me very passive. And so it was strange because at the time it was very comforting. It's just that now I look back and I can see how there were some, it wasn't necessarily a good thing, because the comfort came from a false, from my perspective, someone who's deconverted, a false sense of, God being in control of everything. So at the time, it gave me an excuse to not feel any kind of personal responsibility for anything that happened. So,
which is strange, Heather, because it's not, you were a very active Christian. And so it's strange to think about that, like how you can sort of be passive, but in this, I don't know, progressive way, I guess, not progressive in the liberal sense, right, but progressive in you're still always trying to reach for something,
Yeah, I think it's because, right, so that makes sense though, because I was active and trying to reach, but I was trying to reach, I was trying to improve my life as a Christian, my relationship with God, for the end purpose of what happens after death. For me, it just felt really comforting. It was like a Band-Aid or something, so like it was not really solving problems, and I was again, me being passive is me looking back now. I didn't think about that at the time, but at the time it just felt really great. I mean, because I just didn't have to worry. I was like, well, whatever happens, like God's in control. Yeah, and so this is why I have a lot of anxieties now, because even though I don't believe that anymore, and I can see how it was unhealthy in some ways, there's a part of me that still misses that comfort of just like being able to say, yes, there is an all-powerful, omniscient, omnipotent, right, omnipotent, sorry, cut that, omniscient, omnipotent, God who, is like the puppet master, that is, and so this is also why, and I'm not trying to sound patronizing. I don't want to come across that way, but I do understand, I can understand why people are religious, because there is a comfort to it, to believing that. So, yeah. So, but the downside was that, so when I mean that I was passive, what I mean is that I didn't have a lot of incentive to take active steps towards improving my life here and now, unless it related to my relationship with God. And then I was active, but in relation to other things. So for example, I, when it came to choosing a college, I just did what my parents told me to do and what most people in our church had done, which was that I went to the local, university in our city that we lived in. Now, it wasn't a bad university. It was highly ranked and everything. I feel like I did get a decent education, and it did save me money. So there were good things about it, but I just didn't even conceive of outside options. I remember I looked at one other college, and that was it. And it was just because it was a Christian college, and other than that, I was just sort of like, well, whatever. Like, I guess this is what God wants me to do, so I'm just going to do it. And same thing with just other things, just like when it came to my education and things like that, and relationships, which I mentioned in our previous podcast, that I was kind of closed off, I think, to just like being like, I wasn't open to relationship possibilities when I was in high school and undergrad, because I was just like, oh, God's in control and he'll bring me the perfect guy someday, so it doesn't matter. So that was the downside to it, was just that looking back now, for example, I look at my younger sister, for example, and she was a lot more proactive in her college choice, and it made a huge impact. She is because she went to a better undergrad, she's now at a better graduate school, than I'm at. You can see the way that, and that was also because she chose proactively to go to, in my opinion, a better high school than the one that I went to, because she chose to go to the public school instead of our Christian school. So I can see the way that those decisions do have a long-term impact. Now, does that mean I'm unhappy where I'm at? No, I really like where I've ended up. I think, but I'm just saying, I think I definitely would have done things differently now, looking back, if I could redo it. So so that was the big thing with my worldview, is a Christian stability. And fairness. So that ties into it as well, because I thought, even though there are people in the world who are bad people, I had such an extreme, solid, concrete sense of justice, because justice would happen in the afterlife. So even if in this life someone wasn't getting their just treatment, right? Like if someone, a CEO is exploiting their workers, which of course happens all the time, maybe they're rich and successful and well-respected in our world, but they're not a Christian, so they're going to go to hell. And so that's how I thought about it. And so it didn't bother me. And, social and political injustices didn't bother me in the way that they do now. So, and then the other thing related to this is that another part of my worldview was that, as Christians, we are taught that because we're taught that we're special, we have the truth that other people don't have, and we are going to have this eternal life that's beautiful and wonderful that other people don't have. It creates this discrepancy between what we should be feeling and what we're actually feeling. And so, I always felt growing up that I should be happy all of the time, and yet I wasn't, and I wasn't happy for lots of complicated factors. My class background was a big one. Also my mental health. I have, again, like a lot of anxiety issues, and some depression issues that I wasn't aware of that's what it was when I was younger. And so do a lot of people in my family. So basically I was just a part of a family that was not very, was definitely poor by American standards, certainly not poor by developing country standards, but by American standards, we were poor. We were like at the income level that was right on the cusp of especially when I was younger, poverty line income level.
Yeah, we were below the bread line too. Yeah.
So, and we did anyway, I won't get into that. So there was that, but then there was also, again, like mental health issues in lots of people in my family. And also my parents didn't provide a lot of emotional support for us. So we just didn't get a lot of emotional comfort, and we didn't have conversation. I mentioned this in the previous podcast. So we just didn't really have conversations about our feelings.
Which can have a big impact on your worldview, definitely.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say, that it's just when you don't have an invested parent, and there are levels of investment, right? I'm not saying that my mom or your parents who were my mom. I always say my mom. My dad worked really hard too, but my mom had a bigger impact in terms of how I viewed the world, I guess. So my dad was really hands off, like your parents, emotionally and in some other ways. He loved me, and I knew he loved me, and he articulated that, but otherwise my mom was the one who tried to shape me, Yeah. And I can understand if you don't have those conversations about how to handle, even especially when your parents specifically were proud of their class. Mm-hmm. And so they would never tell you how to handle money correctly. That wouldn't be the part of the conversation. Maybe budgeting with a small amount, you might get something about that. But even so, it's just not part of their worldview.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I know that you can relate to this too, Christine, that, money, knowledge about money, that's so related to class. And it's one of the things that I still feel, I think, has had the most, is going to have the longest term impact on my life. And we know this is true from data as well. I mean, that, this kind of thing happens all the time, that it's very hard to break out of poverty. And it's not just a matter of like suddenly working, and it's not even just a matter of getting an education. Those things can help, but there are deep-rooted things that you can't always escape. And so for me, yeah, one of them is definitely that I just don't have, I don't have knowledge about investing.
Right. And even so, yeah, I totally agree. And even so, when we were talking about those people, those rich people, and my mom didn't do this, but certainly people in the church would do this, where they would say, well, our reward is in heaven. Their reward is now. Their reward is material, and it means less, but our reward is in heaven. And so, yeah, so there's we were doing a different kind of investing.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Which in the moment for me was, again, it was comforting. It's just that after deconversion, now these are all the things that I've had to wrestle with. Like, oh no, I actually have to think about a retirement account. And what do I do? Because no one has ever sat down and talked to me about that. What do I do? How much money should I have in savings? Student loans are a big one. I have a lot of student loans. Part of that's because I'm getting a PhD. So I've been in school for a long time. But it's also partly because I didn't have a lot of financial support from my parents and going to undergrad. So that's a consequence that I'm going to have to, be dealing with. So when I deconverted, I was really stressed about a lot of this stuff, because I suddenly realized. So I.
No. Go ahead. You're fine. I can just take our voices out.
So I realized that, I've always had anxiety issues, because I can identify times when I was really young where I would get panic attacks, or just feeling really overwhelmed with anxiety. I remember having heart palpitations a lot when I was young. So I definitely had anxiety, but it was, covered up and sort of brushed aside and reframed in all of these terms that I already talked about, God's in control and I'm going to go to heaven and these things. So when I deconverted, I really had to actually face my anxiety, and I had a lot more anxiety because I lost that safety blanket Band-Aid that I had put on myself. And so I had to deal with things like, oh, okay, the world is actually really, really chaotic, and there is no order to the world. There is no, again, God who is, pulling all of the strings up in heaven. If something shitty happens, it's just for no reason. It just happens. And if something good happens, it can be really... Now, that's not to say, and I'm going to get to that in a minute, I'm not saying I feel like I have no agency, but it's just that I had to first... that's where I'm at now, but I had to first go through this phase where I was recognizing and coming to terms with the fact that there is a lot of chaos in the world. And you don't always have control. You can do things to help mitigate negative things happening to you. You can try to be healthy. You can try to have money in a savings account. You can get an education, but you can't always control everything. I mean, I could walk out of my house today and get in a car wreck and die, or be permanently disabled, or, what I mean? There's just so many things that happen, or I could be scammed and lose all of my savings. It just doesn't, there's just so many things that I can't control. So I had so when I went to grad school for the first time, this is when I was getting my master's, I just remember really having a meltdown about this, because I just had never had to deal with it before. And fortunately, I had some good friends at the time that helped me talk through it all. But I just had never had to wrestle with that before. And same thing with fairness. Suddenly, the fact that a CEO can exploit their workers and still be successful and have a lot of money is infuriating, because it doesn't, they're not going to hell. We're all going to the same place, wherever that is, when we die. So what, I'm what the fuck? This isn't okay. And so, just angers me. and so I went through a phase of just being really angry too about like injustices in the world. And so and then I think part of that was also tied up in me compensating for the fact that when I was young, my mom and dad would, do the whole Christian, like trying to put a positive spin on something. So, and that really annoyed me. And so, and to this day, I cannot stand, like, if someone, like my mom would do this all the time when we were young. She would do the but game, like, oh, but there are starving children in Africa. That was like her favorite go-to line. And that kind of thing annoys me so much, not because it's untrue. It is true. Like, there are people in developing countries, obviously, that are living in abject poverty, and that's really sad and upsetting. But that doesn't mean that your feelings in the moment are invalid. And that was the problem, in my opinion, with my parents, is that my mom didn't, if she had first validated my feelings and said, hey, I understand why you're so stressed, that you're not allowed to go to your friend's birthday party because we can't afford to get them a present. That was like a big thing when we were little. And as a kid, that's really upsetting and stressful. Yeah, looking back now, I'm like, oh, compared to bigger problems in the world, like, that's not a huge deal. But as a kid, that is very upsetting, to tell your 10-year-old that they're not allowed to go to their friend's birthday party. So anyway, and my mom's response was never, I'm sorry, and I know that this is hard for you. It was just, oh, you should. She would like make me feel guilty for being sad because there are starving kids in Africa. So anyway, when I deconverted because of that, I was like, I am never, and this is something I still hold to, I was like, I am never going to sugarcoat something ever again in my life. If I feel a certain way, I am going to validate that feeling. Now, it doesn't mean I sit with that feeling. That's not healthy. And you do need to be able to come out of a negative feeling and, accept or look at it from a positive perspective. And that's what I'm getting better at now. But I still think it's important to always acknowledge that initial negative feeling. And I do this with myself. I do this with my friends. If my friends complain to me about something, I always make sure the first thing out of my mouth is validation. Even if I don't agree with them, or I'm like, oh, like, oh, but you should also do this, or you should, or if I want to give them practical advice, and I'll do that too. I believe in, I think I talked about this a little bit when I talked about ethical codes, but it's related to this. Like, this is where the idea of genuineness comes from my ethical value, that I believe in, like, just being honest with people and real about how I'm feeling. So anyway, so I think validating your feelings and giving space to your feelings and validating other people's feelings are really important, even when they're negative. And so that was a big deal for me, to be able to acknowledge that there were a lot of things that happened in my childhood, things that I mentioned a few minutes ago, that were really negative, that really affected me in negative ways. That was a huge step for me. Now where I'm at is I'm trying to now, like, swing to a middle ground because I'm like, okay, I don't want to be the fake, cover everything up that in the way that I was raised in a Christian fundamentalist, with this fundamentalist worldview. I also don't want to be always negative and always bitter and angry. So I need to find a way to be in a middle ground. And so I'm getting better at that. And again, through lots of therapy, this is one of the things I've been working on a lot with my therapist, is like, okay, yes, you should validate your feelings and you should allow for some time to feel negative about something, but then you also do need to figure out, how to get out of that negative space. And so I'm doing better. So one of the ways I'm doing better is that, now I recognize, okay, yeah, the world is chaotic and there are things I can't control. And there are people who are bad, and there are things that aren't fair. But there are things that I can control, and I do have agency. I can't control everything, but there are some things that I do have control over. So for example, I'm getting ready to start job searching, which is very scary for anyone. And it's especially scary if you're an academic, because it is a shit show in academia right now. The job market's really awful, et cetera, et cetera. You know, the statistics are pretty dire. So, okay. So I'm acknowledging that it's really scary and it's really shitty. But I'm also able to be like, okay, but there are like things I can do. So I'm starting early to prepare, and I have a to-do list, and I'm, you know, going to be open-minded to looking at all different kinds of jobs, and I'm going to be open to moving wherever there's a job. You know, there's like things that are in my control, and then I have to recognize that there are also things that aren't in my control, which is like what the job search committee does with my materials. You know, like that's out of my hands. But I can work hard on my materials and make sure that they're as good as I can get them, you know, before I send them out. So, so that's better. And then the other thing too, and this is what you were saying, Christine, and I think I'm getting there when you were talking about how, you know, just empowering it can be to feel like you have this moment and, you know, this life. And I'm getting there too. And just recognizing, you know, I have a really, there's so much beauty in my life that I'm enjoying, and I'm especially aware recently of just my health. Like I don't know where that's coming from. Like nothing particular has happened in my life recently, but I'm just like really grateful. I wake up every day thinking I'm just grateful that I'm able-bodied and young and healthy. That's huge. I mean, I don't have to like worry about, you know, being able to live a quality life because of health issues, or being able to get a job, or being able to pay for, you know, bills, health related expenses. So that's something I'm really grateful for. I really love what I'm doing, what I'm studying, and I love teaching. And I have really good friends where I live, and I can afford, now I have to, you know, take out student loans, which sucks, but still I am able to live in a nice apartment. And I'm, you know, eating well and getting to travel occasionally. So there's so many good things about my life. And those things are those things because of my actions. And that's the other empowering thing about it. I mean, I'm doing a PhD because I worked really hard and got an undergrad and in grad school the first time, so that I was able to get into a PhD program. And I made that decision myself, and I worked to get into the program, and I've worked hard since I've been here. And that's really cool. You know, it's cool to say that I'm where I am because of my agent. You know, I have agency, and I am where I am because of my decisions, not because I was like, and so I'm not passive anymore. You know, I've consciously made these choices and actively made these choices.
Yeah, it's interesting, Heather. I think that, and I say that all the time, it's interesting, Heather. To me, it's interesting in terms of where we both are in our deconversion path, because I realized that I did go through a very individualistic phase where I was like, okay, first I have to figure out what I think first, how the world affects me, how I react to things now that I'm not a Christian. And now that I've had a lot of time to do that, I've sort of been able to grow into someone who is more aware of the give, what I can give back, you know, because before I didn't have that strength of self, that strength of character necessarily to give anything back to the world. It was like after I deconverted, I was like, okay, now what? Like, who am I and what do I do? And now that I've developed that sense of who I am and how to be in the moment and be myself in the moment, I can like plan to be a bigger piece of the world around me. And I think that for me has been the process. And I think that hopefully that you'll get there, you know, where you can like recognize how much, and also, I mean, when you're getting your PhD, it's such an individual process anyway. Like you just sort of do it on your own. And so I can see that mind frame. Once you like get out of that too, you'll be like, oh, now I can contribute. I can use these tools that I've built and developed to become, to see the world a certain way. And validate those feelings by acting them out
Yeah.
for other people.
Yeah, which is, I'm getting there, because actually, so I would say just this year, and I think this is a sign that I'm healthy, much healthier. I'm involved in a political activist group now, and also I feel like I just think I have more time and space for friends. So I've noticed that recently I'm like talking to people on the phone a lot more, like friends of mine that live in other states, and even my friends here where I live, in the city that I live in, I'm like more just able to be more present with them and sort of helping them out if they're going through a rough time. And I think that that's because I'm healthier, and that's why it's so important to, I think, for people who are listening who are new to deconversion, it is important to spend some time on yourself first, because you have to get healthy and be secure in yourself in order to then be a good friend, and in order to be a good member of a community and a citizen, a world citizen, like broadly speaking.
Right. You have to. Yeah, you definitely have to find yourself before you can develop your world view. Definitely. I don't think if you develop your worldview before you kind of engage with yourself, that you can find some mismatching things, I think. But you know what? I didn't do it that way, so I don't know. But yeah.
So I think it's interesting. Yeah, I think that we're in similar places. You're just a little further along than me, but that makes sense. You deconverted earlier than me.
11 years ago. Yeah. Just a quick shout out and thank you to our friends Rebecca Kurtzlak and Amanda Kirby for giving us some of their thoughts for the beginning of our podcast. And a shout out to Heather, because she has a poem at the end of this podcast that she wrote herself. Otherwise, thank you for listening and sticking with us as we move into this bi-weekly setup.
If you would like to contact us, you may email us. Our email address is forsakingfaith@gmail.com. You can also tweet us at Forsaking Faith, or like our Facebook page, which is called Forsaking Faith. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast, and we would also appreciate it if you would leave us a review so that more people can find us. These are the days. These are the days of Deborah, prophetess and judger of men's deeds. The Lord's victory, she tells her commander, will belong to a woman. These are the days of Yael, who smashes her enemy's skull with a tent peg. When he asked her to hide him, he thought she was soft, but the steel of Israel runs in her veins. These are the days of Vashti. When her husband asks her to dance for him and his men, she tells them to go fuck themselves, refusing to be a trophy wife. These are the days of Hadassah. She tells the king that if he kills an entire race of people, he will have to kill her too. She cuts her wrist and shows him her blood. Their blood is her blood. When the children of Israel were free after generations of enslavement, it was Miriam who led them into the land of promise. These are the days of darkness, of hunger, and of the sword. But the men of Israel are weak. The Lord's victory belongs to a woman.